course, we're going to be talking about sowing seeds, reaping harvests. But when I read the lesson, the title that come to my mind was Searching for Lost Treasures. Now, I don't know about many of y'all, but whenever I was a little kid, I used to sit around in the yard a lot and look for four-leaf clovers. Any of y'all ever search for four-leaf clovers?
You ever find one?
Anybody ever find any? So you search and you search and you finally found one.
Didn't bring me no luck.
Didn't bring her no luck. Oh. And then when I wasn't hunting for four-leaf clovers, some of y'all guys probably, I don't know how many of you women would do it, but we used to go out in fields and look for arrowheads. Arrowheads. And I looked for them for a bunch of years. And guess what? Guess how many I found?
None.
The same amount of four-leaf clovers I found. None. I must not be a good searcher or something, because I sure didn't find none. But other people could walk right behind me and pick them up, because they had, for some reason, they seemed to have a trained eye. Either they knew what they were looking for, and I didn't, or they had a better sense of what to look past and look to. Now, as we got older, how many of you has ever been to either been to a stream or been to one of those gem mines and ever sifted through the stuff looking for gems? I know a lot of times when we were teenagers, we used to go down to the creek and think that we're gonna find us a big old gold nugget, and we'd be down in the streams walking around, looking around, digging in the rocks. I ain't found nothing that looked like gold. I found some feldspar one time over in Castle County, and it was fool's gold, but it wasn't gold. It was about like sand rock. But we was always on the search for something, wasn't we? And even as we grew up and we took our kids on vacation in the mountains, you see these little stops that says gem mining. And you go in there and you shift through and you pick out several things. Now, when you were looking for a gem, what was you looking for?
A diamond.
How do you know what a diamond looks like, though?
You don't. It's just a
Because,
rock.
I used to think diamonds is going to come out and they're going to be like this little shiny, nice polished, shiny, crystal looking thing that's got a lot of light coming out of it.
But they're not.
But they're not, are they?
No.
Amethyst, what does amethyst look like? Most of them are like a dull purple.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
And they got to be polished to get that high shine. And when we were in Tennessee and in North Carolina, we went through them and we've got bags of stuff laying around that they tell us are gems and stuff like that. But a lot of times we don't put a whole, it's kind of like them four-leaf clovers. How many of you still got your four-leaf clover you found?
I got a yard.
I ain't even gonna, how many of you still, I know Jerry still probably got some arrowheads, but how many of you got arrowheads that you found?
I got one somewhere. Found it down Red Hill.
I found a piece of quartz crystal one time down at the job site and I got it. It's about this big. Yep. But not many of us hang on to those kind of treasures, do we? And then the question is, well, what kind of value did we put on our treasure that we were searching for? And that's what today's lesson is going to be talking about. How do you sift through all the unwants to get what you want, when sometimes you really don't know what you're looking for or what you're asking for? All right, it says, Jesus continued teaching in parable form. A parable is defined as a figure of speech that uses everyday elements and extends them to another realm. The realm of a spiritual Jesus audience knew the elements used in his parables: small seeds, yeast, hidden treasures, and fish. Why was that simple? Because how many of you eat? And how many of you got to understand where your food and crops come from about seed? And how many of you know something about fish? Well, I had some fish yesterday. It was good.
What kind of fish?
Whitefish.
Whitefish, I love whitefish. I want some of that crap you can get.
It says, but there's a trick to all of this. One has to be able to hear beyond the immediate figure and discern truth about the kingdom. This is not easy. Parables are fun to listen to. And if one understands them, and there are 5 in today's lessons. It says parables are earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And that's what we said last week, wasn't it? So something that we can relate with here on earth, but it brings forth thoughts and visions of what heaven's going to be like. They're a comparison, that is, they go from what we know to what we don't know. Now, how many of us have been to heaven? I ain't been to heaven. How many of you dreamed of heaven, though? And when I'm thinking, and I'm going through that in my head, and I'm trying to think what heaven's like, because we all do it, what do we have to compare it to?
Nothing.
Just movies.
So ask yourself, what do you think heaven looks like? Now, in my world, I would like to think it's like green rolling pastures, maybe some trees and a brook or something peaceful and relaxing.
You ever seen, I lost it.
Yeah, I seen it.
You probably did. What dreams may come, you ever seen that?
What dreams may come. Yeah.
With, you seen that?
Yeah. And then it tells us, it's given pictures of heaven being a shiny place lit through the light of noon by God's glory. So we think of it to be in a bright place with no darkness. But when we really think about it, we really don't have nothing to compare heaven by. It's only what we see here. It says the kingdom's concept was fulfilled at the first advent, or no, let's back up. It says, as Jesus taught about the kingdom of heaven, he knew that helpful comparisons were needed. The kingdom concept was fulfilled at the first advent of Jesus and will be consummated by his second advent. In between those two events, Jesus is trying to get people excited about the kingdom. Parables were his ways to accomplish this. Now, when I read that, we got another word. We had heaven, right? And now we got kingdom. Now, are they the same word? Do they give you the same image? It's a trick question. What do we think is heaven being? A place for what?
Milk and honey.
A place of milk and honey. Get what all your needs that you ever desired fulfilled.
No pain.
No pain, no worries.
Tears,
Nothing but Jesus.
no death. Nothing but joy.
It's a place where we're going, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you hear the word kingdom, what do you think about? In history, what would you think about if I said the kingdom of
A realm or country, city.
a country, a city, a group of people? So what is the kingdom? The kingdom is going to be God's family, ain't it? Jesus' family. All of us Christians. Those that make it to this place called heaven. So yeah, when you're thinking about these, you got to keep them separate, because there's a heaven and then there's going to be the kingdom. In kingdom, what's going to be taking place around Jesus? What's around Jesus?
Worship. Praise.
Worship, that's right. Okay. It says the kingdom starts small. Now, how small does the kingdom start?
One person at a time.
One person at a time. All right. Said he told them another parable. Said the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Not seeds, but a what?
One
A
seed.
seed. Any of y'all ever seen mustard seeds? I've had some recipes that calls for mustard seeds, and you go to the store and you get this container. They're smaller than the head of a pin, and they're round.
Yeah, they're right.
And it's real small. So it's like a mustard seed which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He's told them still another parable. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through all the dough. Okay, now we have two parables right there, right?
Yeah.
We got one about the mustard seed. How many of you? We have got a few of you that know something about mustard seed. And then it talks about my favorite. It's talking about putting the yeast in the dough. Now I know most of y'all's probably been to Golden Corral.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of y'all like them yeast rolls, don't you? I know my family does. You can tell we like yeast rolls. How did that happen? If they hadn't put the yeast in the dough, what we would have had?
A tortilla.
Cracker. What they call unleavened bread. How much yeast does it take for 60 pounds?
Not much. Doesn't take much.
Sharon, she makes bread a lot of times, and she'll get the yeast and put it in there to feed it. Don't take much yeast, does it?
No.
But if you leave the yeast out, what happens?
It rises.
It won't do nothing. It just lays there. It's not till you put that yeast in there that it starts growing. And you ever seen them when they're flipping it with their machines? It looks like it's stretching it, and they're throwing this yeast on it. My favorite place to visit is bakeries. You know, I love cheese, but if you've ever been to a cheese factory, you'll find out what I say, that you're probably not your favorite place to visit. Any of y'all ever been to where they make cheese? I know Sharon and all my kids have.
I know it stinks.
The smell alone will turn you off from cheese, won't it?
Probably if I
You have to
don't
get
know
that
what
image
it
out
is.
of your mind whenever you're thinking about cheese. Because if you smell it cooking, you don't want to go back, do you? But when I go to a bakery, boy, and they got that stuff in there and they're starting to heat it up, they're getting that yeast and you can see them working it, and then they're baking it in the oven, and that smell hits you. Woo-wee.
Krispy Kreme.
Makes you hungry. Oh yeah, we went there last night and it was hot now. But I didn't buy none. They did. See how I've been working around that?
You should work, you should eat it, ain't you?
And they were good. Huh?
Missing a dozen.
Some got missing? I don't know what happened to them. They must have disappeared in the night. Well, look hard, I might can find them. But we know that it only takes a little. And it gives you something totally different, don't it? Because once you put the yeast in there, it changes it, don't it? That bread's no longer the same. And then what happens? You gotta what? As Sharon found out, you gotta feed it. And when you feed it, it does what? It starts rising and growing, don't it? Yeah. It'll bust open the bag that you got it in. I think more of that's from the gases it gives off though. But it changes, don't it? Now we think about how this parable has got anything to do with our kingdom. What are we doing as Christians?
Telling others.
What would we be considered? We're the yeast, right? And it's not until we get put in to the bread, into the mix, into society, that we're able to do what we're supposed to do. Because what's yeast in the container? It's just yeast, ain't it? It ain't doing nothing. It's not till you add it to the bread that the magic starts taking place. Same thing with Christians. It's not till we get added to society that things start to change. All right, we'll move on from there. It says 1 man and 12 disciples. This makes a kingdom. We cannot anticipate the final size by looking at the small beginning. Jesus began 2 parables with this phrase: the kingdom of heaven is like. The point of this introduction is not seen clearly until the end of the parable. The kingdom is not like not like seeds and yeast, but rather what happens to them under certain conditions. And what does happen? The mustard seed is the smallest of all your seeds, and yet something beyond all expectations occur. When it grows, it will become the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree. And in its final stage, the kingdom of heaven will resemble a tall shrub affording shelter to the birds. This was a common metaphor describing a mighty kingdom which protects its inhabitants. So if we grow as Christians, who gets the shelter and the protection and the shade? Now, what are we shading them from? What are we protecting them from? Well, it's all those other people that's not Christians. We look in today's society and we see how everything seems to be split and divided. But yet somehow or another this country seems to go on. When we look at our money, and what does it say on it?
In God
we trust. But how many of our people trust in God? So why do they, what he's telling us is that they get protection under the umbrella that we provide. The more Christians we raise, and the more people we bring into Christianity, the more of that umbrella protects us. Yeah, if you wonder why the United States became one of the greatest countries, it wasn't because we were good people, was it? Because where did we come from? We were all the people that got kicked out of all the other countries. Or we left for some reason. It's because God's blessed the United States. And the more we turn away from God, guess what's going to happen? The more his blessings is going to come off of us. So I think it would be in the nation's interest for a revival to take place. If the government wanted to spend its money wisely, it would spend it raising up the Christians and raising up the church. But that don't happen, does it? Have we received any grants lately from the government?
No.
You haven't, have you? And the one thing that the government actually does for us, they're wanting to try to take away. To make you tax exempt for your tithes and offerings. You know, there's a bill right now that is dead right now, but it could come right back up that where they're going to start taxing our tithes. To me, that's double taxing. They've already taxed us on it. But think about it. That umbrella that we're providing. If you want to see a good country for your kids, what do you need to do? We got to raise up more Christians. We got to get stronger in our faith. We got to get a closer walk. Said the yeast is a small morsel mixed into about 60 pounds of flour. The amount described here is almost unbelievable. One has estimated that the bread baked from this amount would provide a meal for more than 100 people. The yeast is worked all through the dough, which is a metaphor for the people of God. With two figures of speech, Jesus told his audience that its kingdom of heaven, while starting out rather inconspicuously, will ultimately take an end of history portions and grow almost beyond its belief. Now the question is, last week we had a parable about the weeds and the wheat kernels, right? And the tares. Now, how hard was it to separate the weeds from the wheat? They told them what? Just wait. Gather it all at one time, and then we'll separate. How hard would it be once you add the yeast to the dough, would it be to separate that yeast from that dough? Because I'm good, but I can't figure out what's what. I don't know how you would ever figure it out, would you? It looks different in the little, we got a little, you tear the tab off, the little package. And it does look a little different from the dough, don't it? Until you add it in, and then what happens?
Then you can't tell the difference.
You
All
can't
you
tell
got.
the difference. It all looks the same.
Mhm.
What about society? What does the society look like once the Christians are added?
All the same.
We look all the same, don't we?
Yeah.
It's hard to separate us. But it can be done, can't it? All right, let's move on to this first question. It said, what makes it possible for a tree to grow and dough to rise?
Yeast.
The yeast will rise and they take care of the seed, water, and nurture it.
There has to be something there. Just like the seeds, it's got to be some fertile ground. It's got to be a conducive environment for it to live. Because you can put yeast in the dough, and we found out, and it die. Why?
It's not fed.
Because you don't feed it. What happens to that mustard seed if you put it in the ground and it starts growing and then you don't give it no water? It's going to die. There's things that we can do in a society to kill out the Christians. It'll be very hard, but don't feed it. Don't allow it to nurture itself. Stop them from meeting. Try to split them up. Bring division. It's all those things the devil uses to get at Christians. And ultimately, what is it trying to do? It's trying to change what happens at the end, right? The magic at the end. It says, as you consider your church and your denomination, do you see yourself as part of a greater kingdom? Now, as Christians and people that go to, let's call it the Wesleyan denomination church, do you consider yourself part of a greater denomination? You should. And why is that? Well, because there's a lot more Wesleyan churches out there that has the same mindset and the same thought pattern that you have. They follow the same bylaws and principles that you follow. That kind of groups you together in a group, don't it? Does that mean you're going to look the same?
No.
Dress the same? You might not even talk the same. Because guess what? We got Wesleyan churches in Africa. May not even talk the same. But ultimately what? We still have the same principles. It says, as part of a growing spiritual kingdom, do you see yourself also growing? How many of you see yourself growing? I guess that's a loaded question too, because I should say, how many of you see yourself physically growing? Some of us are physically growing. Yeah. And some of us have reached our peak in growing.
We hope.
And some of us are on the decline. But spiritually, how many of us see yourselves growing? And how do you know that you're growing? All these are just questions you have to ask yourself. Are you growing? Because if you ain't growing, what's happening?
Not being fed.
You're either maintaining, which is okay in some cases, but not good in most cases, because why? If you're just maintaining, you're just,
Not growing.
yeah. It's too, you're on that point where you can go backwards or forwards. If you're growing, you're going forward. If you're just maintaining, you're standing still. And of course, if you're waning or not growing at all, then you're going another way. As Christians, we always want to see that growth. We always want to do something that betters us and makes us better Christians. It may mean, just like in Bible study, it may mean we start all reading the same scripture so that we can talk about it. Because sometimes people talking about it, you can see things different. And it may get a perspective that somebody didn't even think about. But ultimately, at some point, we've got to share what we've learned. That's the next phase, ain't it? Because why do we want to share?
So others can have the same experience.
For others to have the same experience. It goes back to that maintaining. You know, for years the church has just maintained. What does that mean? Well, look at the numbers. Have we grown in numbers? Have we shrunk in numbers? And we always want to kind of be growing. Why is that? Because it shows growth. Now, does that mean that not growing is a bad thing? Maybe not, because sometimes you got to what?
Prepare to grow.
What happens if you grow too fast? Stretch marks. Your head might get too heavy for your neck. You might crunch over because my buddy's son, Dylan, he grew too fast. They was telling me he was growing too fast. So they started giving him medicines to try to help him, his growth catch up, his body catch up with his growth pattern. But as a church, if you grow too fast, what could happen?
You forget things.
Well, just like throwing them seeds everywhere, what happens? You can't control them where the seeds land, can you? So then we have what? We got seeds over here that are dying. We got seeds over here that are doing good. And we got seeds over here that are just, well, they're just seeds. A lot of times when you see these big churches come in and they open the doors and they fill them up with thousands of people, but if they haven't got deep roots and they're not providing what people need, they're not nourishing the people, what happens?
Die.
Why? Why do they die?
Because of not nurturing.
Any of y'all, I know Eugene's been there and I know the pastor's been there. How many of you have been to the New Hope Church? And down in Durham. It's a big church, right? Think about what it costs to run that church.
Yeah.
And the overhead that they have.
There's a big church in Pleasant Garden too.
Just think about a church that has 10,000 people. And what it costs. Their light bill at New Hope is more than all of our bills for 1 month is more than all of our bills for a whole year. So guess what? They have to sustain that. Because what happens if they don't?
They lose the building.
They close the doors. You know, we don't like to think of church as a business, but sometimes it is a business. Because it requires money to have lights. It requires money to have heat. You know, it requires fixing a driveway when it gets so wet you can't drive in it. Gravel. It requires mowing the grass. Cleaning the church up, keeping the water on. All those things are things that we have to feed. That's the reason why we give our tithes. We're feeding the church. Now, sometimes you have to maintain just so your roots can grow deeper into the soil to get prepared. Get stronger roots. But at some point, we're going to be asked to go out and start multiplying. Now, it seems like a lot of times in churches, the way to multiply is what? Have more kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've done my part, and I'm done. Some of y'all other people now.
I'm through.
But
I've been through
think
years.
about it. But then we think about how many of us has had kids, and how many of us have had kids in this church, and now how many of us don't have kids in this church. You know, and I understand because people move, people ship. And it's like Jacqueline, you know, they move far away, so sometimes they can be here, sometimes they can't. You know, and it would do my heart better if they actually found them a church close to home. But if they don't have a home church, then I want them here when they can be here. But think about it. When have we actually seen new faces? It's been a while. That's right. All right, moving on. Jesus told a parable of growth, and his audience greatly enjoyed hearing this master teach. But why in parables? The Jewish rabbis perhaps used this method of teaching, but not with the skill that Jesus displayed. What was the purposes of Jesus using these parables? So section 2, parables can reveal hidden treasures Secrets of the kingdom. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. The gospel writers included a number of parables in each of their writings. By one counting, Matthew related 23 parables of Jesus, but why? Matthew provided a clue in his text. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd. This implies that the audience not only included the disciples, but others as well. They were not all on the same spiritual levels. One would expect the disciples to understand more of Jesus' teaching than others. And one gets the impression that at this point in Jesus' ministry, parables were the normal way of teaching because he did not say anything to them without using a parable. Why parables? Because the method fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. Matthew quoted from Psalm 78, verse 2 to explain the parable entered one to utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Parables are used to speak about deep hidden secrets of God. Earlier, Jesus told the disciples that parables dealt with the secrets of the kingdom. The word secret is also translated as the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. What is it that God had hidden from creation? And did God hide? The secret of mysteries is that God will have a people who worship him and choose to be identified with him. They will serve him while on earth and ultimately will live with him forever. The kingdom of heaven will include people from all ethnic groups and will come about through the death and resurrection of the Messiah. But parables are sometimes difficult to understand. Shouldn't something as important as this be told in plain, simple words? Later, the Apostle Paul declared the mysteries of kingdom in his epistles. But for now, Jesus told the same gospel truth in parable form. It says, what was the parable teacher par excellence? Have you ever tried to speak a parable, and what was the result? Now, see, that's hard to do, is talk in parables if you're a Christian, because why? You can't come up with some of your original because you always fall back on what Jesus said and the disciples wrote in the Bible. Any of y'all ever had like a parable, like a penny saved is a penny earned? Little saying like that? What's good for the goose is good for the gander?
Yeah.
What's the meaning of that?
If you made your bed, you gotta lay in it.
Make your bed, you gotta lie in it.
Can't have your cake and eat it too.
Well, lie down with the dogs, you wake up with the fleas. That's right. If you're gonna be dumb, you gotta be tough.
I had to be.
But things like that, what does it do? I mean, it sounds silly, right? It sounds silly. Lie down with the dogs and wake up with the fleas, don't it?
Yeah.
But what does that mean? That's another one. Reap what you sow. When I think about things like that, I don't think about a dog laying down in the bed, you laying down in the dog bed and coming up with fleas. Even though that's what it says, right? What do you think?
I think you're gonna becoming like the people you are around.
That's right. To lie down with dogs and wake up with fleas. If you run around with bad people, guess what's going to happen? Something's going to happen and you're going to wind up bad too. So take that option, take the chances. Or if you're doing something and you're expecting a different result. You reap what you sow. None of us wants to reap sin, do we? But what do we sow sometimes?
Sin.
Because of things that we do. The actions are the things we put ourselves into. And sometimes it may not even be on purpose. We may intentionally do something that causes it. As grown-ups, we'll be driving down the road. and somebody whips in front of you.
Oh, Lord,
Are you careful what you say when you do it? And you have to slam on brakes?
not always.
You know, think about that country song where the guy was driving and his little 3-year-old son was in the truck.
Yeah.
He had to slam on brakes and his fries went a-flying. And he said a 4-letter word.
The boy did too.
And then he asked him where he learned that word. He said, from you, Dad.
Watching you, Dad.
That's right. But think about it. My wife gets on to me about that all the time. Is how you act and how you do, your kids absorb it. And it may be unintentional. But it happens, don't it? All right. People who choose to identify with organizations begin to take on characteristics of the larger group. So it is with loyal adherence to the kingdom of heaven. What did Jesus say about the kingdom people? These two parables are again introduced by the phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like. And point again to the end of each of the parable. The points of interest are treasures that has been hidden and fine pearls. Well, I think I just skipped a bunch of stuff. Let me back up and read the verse, because I think I skipped it. It says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasures hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all that he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Now, you ever ask yourself, why was he looking? He found a treasure in somebody else's field, though, didn't he? That's what it sounded like.
He stole their treasure.
No, he went and worked for it and paid for it. Yeah. Now then we think about, when I read that, the image that comes to my mind is gold nuggets. Who does the gold nugget belong to?
Person on that field.
Let's just say you're walking along and you kick over a rock and it's a gold nugget. Who does the gold nugget belong to?
Mine if I pick it up.
Yours, if you possess, is 99% ownership, ain't it? How many of you know what the largest gold nugget ever found was and where it was found? Y'all don't know? Y'all ain't never read that? Y'all know anything about the Reed's Gold Mine?
Yeah.
Well, the Reed's Gold Mine was a result. This professor was going around trying to find gold. And he did his studies and he looked at his charts and he decided that the area over on the other side of Asheboro looked like a good place to start looking. So he kind of went out there, and this was several years ago, and he went by this old house and there was an old gentleman there, and the door, of course, back then, you know, the doors were always propped open, right? Well, the guy had the door propped open with this big old rock. Come to find out, it was a 17-pound gold nugget.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that story.
And the professor knew what it was, and he bought it from him. And the guy said, oh, that rock? Yeah, I'll sell it to you. So I got more down yonder. He didn't know what he had. Now, how many of us are like that old guy that had this rock propping his door open? He probably sold the most valuable thing he ever owned.
Yeah.
And didn't even know what it was. And that's what sin's like. Sin's just like being like that old farmer. He didn't know what he had and he wound up selling it. Why? Because he seen that dollar, didn't he?
Greed.
He thought he had some, he was getting some value.
Sell my doorstop.
You ain't gonna sell your doorstop?
No.
Is she your doorstop?
Thanks.
Said to myself. Think about it. Ain't that what sin's like? We've all got the ability to be, we're all saved. All we got to do is just choose to be saved. So it's kind of like that rock that's propping open the door. It's always been there. Jesus has already paid for it. But yet we'll let some slick talking salesman come in and give us a little something shiny and sell him our rock or our chunk of gold or our salvation. That's what the devil does. I knew I could bring that back around so y'all would understand that. Ain't that amazing how life, just things in life, actual events, have godly meanings?
Amen.
All right. It says, but the parable is not just about the joy. The joy produces a reaction. The reaction is clearly visible. In the first example, the individual sold all that they had. In the second case, the merchant sold everything. Why this reaction? Because when people are seized with the great joy over their discoveries, everything else seems valueless. No price is too great to pay. So it is whenever we are overcome by the grace of God, when we become part of God's eternal kingdom, our hearts are filled with the gladness and produce wholehearted self-sacrifices. It says, were you seeking the grace of God or did it find you? That's a hard question, ain't it? Or was the grace of God already there, you just couldn't see it? And is it possible to separate the two? It says the kingdom of heaven is characterized by joy now and in the future. And it says, are you a joyful person? What are the synonyms of joyful, and why is joyful different from the other terms? And it says it calls for a personal response. It says when you contrast joy with happy, glad, and pleasure, you see that these other terms are dependent on circumstances to produce that state of happiness, gladness, or pleasure. Joy is the only term that can stand on its own despite any kind of circumstances. It says, as being introduced into the kingdom of heaven produce heartfelt self-sacrifices for you. And that's a personal response as well. But hopefully it has. Hopefully you're happy that you're in the kingdom of heaven. It says, but who may be included in the kingdom of heaven? Surely kingdom status must be saved for those who truly deserve to be in the kingdom. Surely only good people can be candidates for God's eternal kingdom. The disciples fit this description. They were not the elite of society. Some of them would be characterized as weak and unlearned. Yet they were followers of Jesus. Why did Jesus allow this? And he told one more parable. It says, once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down in the lake and caught all kinds of fish. It said, when it was full, the fishermen pulled it back up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad fish away. This is how it would be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous, and throw them into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So as before, the parable begins with the phrase, the kingdom of heaven is like. And it must be understood by the end where the kingdom is compared with the sorting out of the fish. The net is either dragged between two boats or is laid out by a single boat and dragged up to the land with long ropes. Any of y'all ever seen that happen? If you go down on Emerald Isle, it's usually about second week in October, they'll be doing that. They have a big fish fry for the whole entire town. And they'll row these big long white boats out there with nets. And then they'll get a tractor up there. They'll bring the nets back and hook it to the tractor, and the tractor will pull all them fish in. There'll be thousands and thousands of fish in there. And of course, the real strong fish, you'll see them jump out of the net. But thousands of fish. And then they go through and they sort through what they want. It's kind of the same thing. A lot of fish you sort through. You ever think about how many people it would take to be sorted through if God or the angels was going to sort through everybody on the earth right now? How many people are there right now? Anybody know? I know they did a survey
6
for the
billion.
United States. A lot of countries don't even take population.
6 billion.
We guesstimate around 6 billion. That sounds about right. That's a lot of people, ain't it?
Yeah.
Now, if I had to sort through them, they'd probably spoil before I got through them all, because I'd get tired and have to take a nap. And guess what? I probably wouldn't get it right. Because how would I be able to judge who's good and who's bad? Because I can only see what I can see. Just like what we were saying about kingdom. We can only compare heaven from the things we've seen here on earth. But the angels are where? They're all around us, amongst us. They know what's going on. And they also have somebody telling them what to do, right? So basically, Jesus is doing the separating. All right? Let's see here. Jesus quickly interpreted to the Pharaoh, this is how it will be at the end age. Kingdom time is separation time. The final judgment ushers in the kingdom of God. The kingdom will be consummated with certain decisive and end time events. And these are all alluded to in this parable. But note, before the separation, good and bad are mixed together. There will be the appointed time when it was full, and when the separation will begin, but not now, and why not? First, humans would not be capable of effectively carrying out the separation. People cannot discern others' hearts. If they attempt to make an effective separation, they will inevitably commit errors of judgment and separate the good with the bad. Second, God has fixed the moment of separation. Now is the opportunity of grace. The last opportunity of repentance has not yet run out. And says, do you think it is relatively easy to identify a true believer? It's not easy sometimes. But what do we look for as signs of a true believer?
Fruit.
Yep. First off, you're going to see Christian traits, right? And that may not always prove that he's a Christian. Then we got to look at the fruits. What kind of fruits is he producing? Sometimes people will try to change them fruits and make you think it's one thing. But ultimately, what'll happen? How do you know you got apple seed?
It'll produce an apple.
When you plant it, it produces another apple. When you get somebody that's producing those fruits, and then those fruits are producing more of the same kind of fruits, then you know it's the good fruit. It says, what are the implications of Christian and non-Christians coexisting together now? How many of you are like me? You want to be a separatist? You know what a separatist is? I got to hurry up. Separatist is I want to split myself away from all that and just stay away from it. What happens when you do that?
You don't get in trouble.
You're not able to be a witness.
You're taking that light and you're putting that bushel over. And then a lot of times what happens when you do that? You put your own light out. You're trying to keep yourself separated from it, but you wind up hurting yourself. Same thing with it's all different things in society. If you don't intermingle with different ethnic groups, what happens? Then we have problems that we had in the beginning. You have this group thinking they're better than that group, and forgetting the whole fact that we're all God's children. If you don't intermix with Hispanics, what do you miss out on? You know, if you don't never talk to somebody that's from the Middle East, and you just lump them all into terrorists. We're easy to do that, aren't we? Because that's the image that we get. That's the image that the news tries to portray us, that everybody from the Middle East is a terrorist. That's not true. So we have to be like God. We got to love everybody, even our enemies. It's hard to do sometimes, ain't it? All right, I'm going to leave you with all that, but that's a lot to take in. But I don't want to run too far into the preacher's time either.